I'm planning a trip with your grandparents. What about you? Do you have any plans? I called my son Anthony after receiving an invitation from my in-laws to join them on a vacation. Well, I have practice. You all should go and have fun. Isn't this trip a bit out of the ordinary? Are you okay, Mom? I'll manage. I'll bring you back a souvenir, so work hard at your practice. Influenced by me, Anson has always been passionate about marathon running. He even earned a college scholarship for it. Though his university is nearby, he stays in the dorms to save on commuting time and only comes home during long holidays. I knew he couldn't join the trip, but I thought I should at least ask. His response was exactly what I expected. My name is Flora, a 46-year-old working woman. My husband Steve is 4 years older than me and was once my boss. He is a competent man, and I respect him. After our marriage and the birth of our son, we built a happy family. Yet somewhere along the way, our relationship began to break down. The root cause? My husband's parents, especially his mother, who had a problem with me from the moment we got married and has been bullying me ever since. In the beginning, Steve would stand up for me, and because we lived far away from his parents, we seldom met them and managed to get by. But when our son, who loves marathoning, wanted to attend a high school near my in-laws, things changed. The reason he got into running was me. I used to run marathons and still do occasionally. It made me happy to see him take an interest in running, just like me. So, I convinced Steve to move closer to the high school my son wanted to attend. Steve applied for a transfer at work for our son's sake, and we moved. My son was recommended for his university from this high school, so I think it worked out well. Go get the rental car tomorrow morning and pick up my parents on your way back, Steve said the day before our trip, leaving me puzzled. Ha! Why am I the one renting the car? What are you going to do? I'm exhausted from work, so I'll sleep until the last minute. Once you pick up my parents, come back and I'll take over from there. It's on the way to our destination anyway. I understood his logic, but if anything, I was even more drained. Despite working similar hours, I handled all the household chores. Reflecting on it, we used to share household tasks equally. However, since moving closer to his parents, their frequent visits disrupted this balance. Whenever his mother caught Steve doing housework, she vehemently opposed it. Housework is the wife's job. It's not something the breadwinner should do. Isn't that right, Flora? His mother's intense gaze overwhelmed me, and I found myself nodding in agreement. This pattern persisted until Steve gradually ceased all household tasks. While some blame fell on Steve, I believed his mother played a significant role. Furthermore, Steve began echoing his mother's views, asserting, "I am the breadwinner," from time to time. By then, it felt futile to rectify the situation, and I lacked the motivation to even attempt it. Steve underwent significant changes in the past few years. His work performance appeared to decline, and he often directed his frustrations towards me. However, I found that arguing back only led to more trouble, so I chose to accept the situation. It seemed like the least stressful way to live. The thoughts of divorce crossed my mind at times. The prospect of our son's college recommendation held me back. I feared it might disadvantage him if we became a single-parent family, so I shelved the idea. Instead, I adopted a mindset of caring for a pet rather than a person, which surprisingly alleviated some of my stress. Gradually, I realized that pursuing a divorce wasn't worth the energy, and that's how I've ended up where I am today. The reason I agreed to this trip was simple. It was to a resort I adored. I knew I could have a fantastic time, even if I ended up exploring alone. Frankly, I was prepared to do things separately from my in-laws and husband, if need be. Perhaps I was invited mainly for driving duties, but both my husband and father-in-law could drive, so I figured it would work out. Anyway, I played along with the notion that our pampered pooch was being demanding again, got the rental car as instructed by my husband, and headed to my in-laws' place. "Flora, you're late. Is that the car for today? You should have rented a bigger one." "Well, it's better than your tiny car, at least." The car we typically use is one I bought myself. Given that I commute to work, I naturally assumed I'd be its primary user, having paid for it out of my own pocket. We don't venture out of town often, and I figured a compact car would suffice. Besides, I was smitten with its interior design and color, so I made the purchase. Yet my husband would help himself to it without asking and even chauffeur his parents around in it. To make matters worse, my in-laws criticized the car's size and treated me as if I could only afford a modest vehicle. I suggested they use my father-in-law's car for the trip, but he was reluctant to let others drive it and didn't want to take on the entire driving responsibility himself. Consequently, we opted to rent a car. However, I wasn't consulted about any of this. I merely discovered I'd be responsible for picking up the rental car and driving it, with them comfortably settled in the back seat. It left me tempted to suggest they handle their own transportation. To put it simply, they're exhausting. In the end, despite my husband's initial promise to share the driving duties, he slept for the entire journey. My father-in-law refused to drive unless it was his own car, leaving me to navigate the entire trip to our destination. With my husband dozing in the passenger seat, my father-in-law incessantly criticized my driving. He'd nitpick, suggesting turns after it was too late or questioning my decisions at traffic lights. It was nothing but needless stress. Adding to the chorus, my mother-in-law chimed in, disparaging my driving skills. I found it particularly irksome to be critiqued by someone who couldn't drive herself, especially when compared to my father-in-law, who had been involved in numerous accidents. Despite suggestions for him to relinquish his license, my mother-in-law stubbornly insisted he was merely unlucky and a proficient driver. Well, I had no desire to be chauffeured by him anyway. I didn't mind taking the wheel, but I wished they'd refrain from constant interference. Upon arriving at our destination, my husband finally stirred from his slumber. Exhausted from a day spent in the car, we obliged my in-laws' suggestion to unwind at the hotel, opting to forego any outdoor activities. I relished the opportunity to unwind, taking a dip in the pool and leisurely exploring the hotel grounds. It was a satisfying way to spend the day. Following a delicious dinner and a relaxing visit to the spa, I returned to our room to find my husband already fast asleep. I wasn't sure what my in-laws were up to in the adjacent room, but they were likely fast asleep. After enjoying a beer in our room, I settled into bed. When I awoke to the crisp morning air, my husband was still sound asleep. With some time before breakfast, I decided to take a leisurely stroll. However, upon my return, I was met with an unthinkable sight. My husband was nowhere to be found, and his belongings were missing too. Frantically, I searched the room and even attempted to reach my in-laws next door, but there was no response. At the front desk, I learned they had already finished breakfast an hour earlier than I had been told. It seemed they had left me behind. Additionally, I was left to settle the checkout process alone. Was my mother-in-law's offer to cover our stay just a ruse? Left with no alternative, I settled the bills for both rooms and departed the hotel, only to find there was no car awaiting me. Lost in contemplation about my next move, my phone suddenly rang. It was my mother-in-law. Where are you now?" I inquired, puzzled by the situation. My mother-in-law chuckled in response. "Just enjoying some quality family time since we're on vacation." "Ah, I see. But then why didn't you all just go together from the beginning instead of leaving me behind?" I couldn't help but ask. "Well, Flora, you did express interest in joining us, didn't you? That's why we decided to bring you along," she replied casually. I recalled mentioning my desire to visit this resort while casually watching TV with my husband. Was that what he remembered? Typically, it would have been endearing if he recalled my casual remarks, but this time it felt like he used it to irk me. What's more, I was the one who did most of the driving to get here. Why should I be reminded that I was brought here by my mother-in-law, who neither drove nor contributed financially? Beyond anger, all I could do was sigh. "Fine then, let's go sightseeing as a family and head home afterward. You can do some sightseeing too, Flora, and then return. We're not sure how you'll get back, but you're quite adept at marathons, aren't you?" "Just run back," my mother-in-law taunted, her laughter fueling my frustration. "If Steve is driving, put me on speakerphone so he can hear me," I demanded, my anger boiling over. As soon as I made the request, it seemed my mother-in-law transferred the call, and my husband's voice filled the line. "Good morning. You were eager to come here, weren't you? Take it easy today, but remember we have laundry from the trip to tackle. Make sure it's washed by tomorrow morning," he chimed, sounding cheerful. But any warmth I once felt for him had dissipated. "Do your own laundry," I retorted sharply. "Hey, that's not a nice way to speak. As the breadwinner, I'm advising you to relax today. You should be thanking me," he replied. "Oh, the breadwinner. Don't worry, this will be the last time we see each other." "Well, you've mostly seen me asleep," I countered, my tone laced with finality. "What do you mean?" he asked, clearly puzzled. "We need to head back home today. There's laundry and house cleaning waiting for us, my husband declared. Yeah, that's exactly why I'm not going back, I responded firmly. What do you mean? His voice quivered with uncertainty. I'm filing for divorce. Remember 6 months ago when you told me you met your soulmate, your childhood friend, and you were planning to marry her? The one who moved back to your hometown after her divorce. I reminded him, feeling a surge of emotion. It had been about 6 months since I confronted my husband, sensing something was amiss, and he confessed. He had reconnected with his childhood friend and believed she was his true love. He wanted to divorce me and marry her to support her and her child as a single mother. He handed me the pre-filled divorce papers, but I couldn't bring myself to agree to end our marriage. We didn't speak for days afterward until he realized he needed my help with household chores. Eventually, he asked me to forget his previous words, but I couldn't simply disregard them, and I began gathering evidence of his infidelity. I found myself pondering whether Steve had orchestrated this trip to win me over. The conversation we had occurred roughly 3 months ago, shortly after I quit my job. As I voiced my thoughts, I could hear the surprise in my in-laws' voices on the other end of the speakerphone. It seemed this was the first they were hearing about their son's job resignation. I remember when you announced you were leaving your job. I expressed concern about finding a new one and disagreed with your reasons, didn't I? I continued, recalling the exchange. You were confident in your abilities and assured me you'd land a new job quickly. Yet here we are, and you've only managed to secure a part-time position. I can't help but wonder when you'll find something more stable. As Steve remained silent while driving, I seized the moment to lay out my thoughts. I've been visualizing you as a dog to cope with the stress, but then I realized I might as well get a real one, I declared firmly. So, I'll be filing the divorce papers. Enjoy your family vacation. My in-laws called out my name in shock, and my husband attempted to say something, but I disconnected the call without a second thought. Opting to make the most of sightseeing before heading home, I explained the situation to my son over the phone. His response was a simple, "I told you so." While his reaction was expected, it felt somewhat lighter than I anticipated, given his prior knowledge of the situation. Upon returning from the trip, I chose not to return home. Instead, I kept mine and my son's belongings in a self-storage unit, prepared for any eventuality. Equipped with only the essentials, I made my way to a real estate agency. The sales representative, with whom I had developed a professional relationship and had shared drinks on several occasions, greeted me warmly. As a woman of my generation, she was easy to talk to. Over our drinks, I had confided in her about my husband and in-laws, and asked her to keep an eye out for available properties, just in case. That day, I signed a contract for my own place. With the security of my new home, I felt a sense of relief and proceeded to submit the divorce papers at the city hall, where the process proceeded without any issue. Finally, I decided to return the numerous calls my ex-husband had made. "Hello," I began, my voice steady. "The divorce papers have been accepted. We are now officially strangers." My husband's panicked voice reverberated through the phone. "Are you serious about the divorce? I ended things with her. It's just you now. You didn't like me looking at other women, right? Well, now I'm only focused on you. Please come back without any worries." But his words only elicited disgust from me. "Huh? What are you talking about? I never aimed to please you in the first place. And you didn't end things with her, did you? You were dumped because you couldn't find a job and you had no money, correct?" As it turned out, my husband's mistress was acquainted with the sales representative who had helped us find our new place. What a small world. She had listened to my husband's mistress's complaints about him, claiming to be his current girlfriend. Apparently, after he quit his job and started working part-time, she saw no reason to stay with him and ended things. But a fling is just a fling. I'll definitely be seeking compensation. That's correct. Even though they've split up now, the fact remains that he cheated, and there's evidence. Compensation. I already told you we broke up. It's just you now. At this point, I could only let out a sigh. So you're implying that now that you're single, you're considering another affair. I don't care what you do, but I'm through with being taken advantage of. You didn't even notice that your belongings were missing from the house because you didn't care, did you? I'm not returning, so dispose of whatever you don't need. With that, I'd ended the call. Despite this, my ex-husband continued to call me, and even my former in-laws reached out. But of course, I have no intention of returning to that house. My ex-husband still hasn't found a job, can't afford the rent, and has moved back in with his parents. Meanwhile, my ex-father-in-law continues to drive recklessly and recently crashed into a neighbor's fence with my ex-mother-in-law in the car. Thankfully, no one was injured, but they lacked property insurance and had to borrow money to cover the repair costs. All of this was detailed in an email that my ex-husband continued to send me. I find his misfortune somewhat amusing. While I don't respond, I haven't blocked his emails either, quietly enjoying the spectacle. After moving to a pet-friendly property, I welcomed a small dog into my life and discovered that I found more joy in caring for a pet than for people. My son, concerned about my solitude, has begun visiting on weekends, a shift from his previous pattern of only coming during extended holidays. Each day is now filled with fulfillment. Perhaps this weekend, I'll revisit that resort town for the first time in a while.